The supreme arbitrator of the Grai Empire, a creature resembling a teapot with legs, made a sound akin to gargling pebbles. Let the record reflect, it declared, that we have formulated the most brilliant punishment for the human, Jack Thorne. A wave of murmurs and self-satisfied nods rippled through the council chamber as the tentacled Grai officials congratulated themselves. The arbitrator continued, "We will cast him into the pit of wear and doom, where the great drakes of Gorth will reduce him to, well, let's just say he won't be recognizable afterward." The gallery erupted in cheers, a display of Grai smugness at their elaborate methods of dealing with those who dared to offend them, like spilling coffee on a diplomat. Jack Thorne, shackled to a hovercart resembling a glorified wheelbarrow, sighed dramatically. "You know," he said, "a simple laser would have been more efficient. This is a bit much, don't you think?" "Silence," the arbitrator snapped, its appendages flapping in annoyance. "Your impudence will cease when you meet the fiery breath of our mighty drakes." "Fiery breath," Jack mumbled. "How very original." The pit of wear and doom turned out to be less of a pit and more of a large crater. Scattered across the floor were scorch marks, bones, and surprisingly, a few snack wrappers, suggesting even dragons enjoyed the occasional junk food. Grai dignitaries lined the rim, sipping drinks through elaborate straws, anticipating the spectacle. Jack, still bound, was unceremoniously dropped into the pit by a robotic arm. He sat up, dusting himself off. "Charming," he remarked to no one in particular. An ominous rumbling echoed from the shadows as two enormous drakes, each the size of a small starship, lumbered into view. Their scales shimmered like molten gold, their eyes glowed intensely, and their talons looked capable of shredding anything. One snorted, sending a puff of smoke into the air. Jack tilted his head. "Hey," he said. "You're bigger than I expected." The crowd roared with anticipation. "Devour him," one shrieked. "Turn him to ashes," yelled another. Jack stood, stretched, and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small packet of trail mix. "Anyone want a snack?" he asked the drakes, offering a handful of nuts and dried fruit. The drakes paused, taken aback. Humans usually screamed or cried, not offered snacks. This was new. One sniffed cautiously, then flicked out an incredibly long tongue, snatching the offering. "Thought so," Jack said with a grin. He tossed a few more pieces into the air, and the second drake snapped them up. The crowd fell silent, utterly bewildered. "Why isn't he dead?" one dignitary hissed. Within minutes, Jack had both drakes sitting before him like obedient, oversized puppies. He tapped his chin. "Let's see," he said, pointing to the larger one. "You look like a fluffy." The drake tilted its head, rumbling questioningly. The smaller one growled. Jack waved it off. "Don't worry, you'll get a name too. Just give me a minute." Above, the arbitrator was experiencing a crisis. "What is this nonsense?" it bellowed, flailing its tentacles. He should be screaming. "Where is the screaming?" Jack looked up and waved cheerfully. "Hey! Thanks for the dragons. They're adorable." Ignoring the arbitrator's outburst, Jack rummaged in his pocket. "You two want to learn some tricks? Let's start with something simple, sit." To the Grai's horror, both drakes Saturday. The arbitrator's eyes bulged. This cannot be happening." "Oh, it's happening," Jack called up, patting Fluffy's massive head. "Good boy. Now, let's work on rolling over." The sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the crater. The pit of wear and doom, now less a place of execution and more a bizarre playground, echoed with the happy rumbles of two very large, very content drakes. Jack, leaning against Fluffy's flank, idly tossed bits of trail mix into the air as the drakes played a fiery game of fetch with a charred bone. The Grai dignitaries, their initial excitement having curdled into horrified disbelief, were in a state of utter pandemonium. "This is a catastrophe," one wailed, his elaborate straw dangling limply from his trembling appendage. He's tamed them." The arbitrator, its composure shattered, collapsed into its chair, muttering incoherently. "I just don't understand, humans are supposed to be inferior." Jack's voice drifted up from the pit, clear and amused. You really should have done your research. We're good with animals. He leaned casually against Fluffy's enormous shoulder, munching on a granola bar he'd produced from yet another seemingly bottomless pocket. The second drake, now christened Sparky due to an incident involving an ill-timed sneeze and a brief but intense burst of flame, rested its head on the ground, watching Jack with rapt attention. Okay, Fluffy, Jack said, gesturing with the granola bar as if conducting an orchestra. Let's show them your new trick. Play dead. The massive drake let out a theatrical groan and collapsed onto its side with all the dramatic flair of a seasoned stage actor portraying a tragic demise. Dust billowed as Fluffy sprawled across the pit, his tail twitching slightly for added effect. The Gry audience recoiled in unison, their confusion palpable. What in the name of the 7 galaxies is he doing? Screeched the Supreme Arbitrator, perilously close to experiencing a tentacle-induced stroke. He appears to be teaching them theatrics, mumbled an advisor, wisely considering the merits of feigning their own death to avoid further involvement in the unfolding debacle. Sparky, not wanting to be outdone, attempted the same maneuver, but misjudged the distance and landed rather clumsily on Fluffy's wing. The larger drake let out a disgruntled grumble, which Jack immediately countered with an exaggerated wag of his finger. Fluffy, be nice. Sparky's still learning. By this point, Jack's relaxed demeanor had begun to sow widespread panic among the Gry. The arbitrator called for an emergency consultation, which consisted mostly of frantic whispers and excessive tentacle flailing. Perhaps the drakes are defective, one dignitary suggested nervously. Defective? They're 6-story tall engines of destruction, the arbitrator snapped. Another official chimed in, well, they're certainly not behaving like it. Should we consider sending reinforcements? The arbitrator turned, its voice dripping with sarcasm. Reinforcements? And what, pray tell, do you propose we send into a pit filled with dragons that are now apparently best friends with a human? The group fell silent, occasionally glancing down at the pit where Jack was now attempting to teach Sparky to shake hands, or claws, as it were. Jack, meanwhile, had become completely comfortable in his new surroundings. See, Fluffy, he said, scratching the large drake under the chin. The trick is understanding motivation. They think you're mindless beasts, but we know you're just misunderstood, don't we? Fluffy rumbled in agreement, and Jack grinned. Right, now let's show them what teamwork looks like. He pulled out a stick, an actual, ordinary stick, charred at one end, and waved it like a conductor's baton. Fluffy and Sparky stood at attention, their massive heads tilted in curiosity. Fetch! Jack shouted, hurling the stick across the pit. Both drakes leaped after it, their combined weight shaking the ground so violently that several Gry dignitaries lost their footing and tumbled into their overpriced drinks. The dragons wrestled briefly for the stick before Fluffy triumphantly carried it back, tail wagging like a colossal metronome. The arbitrator was beside itself. This isn't just humiliating. It's a complete and utter disaster. Our reputation is in ruins. Another official, having abandoned all hope, muttered, maybe we should negotiate. Negotiate, the arbitrator shrieked, pointing a trembling appendage at Jack, who was now riding Fluffy like a seasoned cowboy, complete with exaggerated yee-haws. Well, the official stammered, he does seem to be in control of the situation. Control, the arbitrator spluttered. He's turned our death sentence into a cosmic circus. Jack, still shackled, was unceremoniously deposited into the pit by a mechanical arm. He landed with a thud, sat up, and brushed the dust from his clothes. Lovely accommodations, he remarked dryly, addressing no one in particular. A deep, ominous rumble emanated from the shadows, and 2 colossal drakes, each the size of a small spacecraft, emerged into the light. Their scales shimmered like liquid gold, their eyes burned with an intense inner fire, and their claws appeared sharp enough to tear through steel. One of the drakes exhaled, a puff of smoke curling into the air. Jack tilted his head, observing them. He commented. Larger than advertised. The gathered Gry roared in eager anticipation. Consume him, one shrieked. Reduce him to cinders, another yelled. Jack rose to his feet, stretched, and then, to the bewilderment of everyone present, reached into his jacket and retrieved a small bag of trail mix. Care for a snack? He inquired of the drakes, offering them a handful of nuts and dried fruit. The drakes hesitated, momentarily thrown off guard. Humans typically responded to their presence with screams, tears, or general terror. Snacks were an unexpected development. One of the drakes cautiously sniffed the offering before extending an extraordinarily long tongue to snatch the treat from Jack's hand. "Figured you might like those," Jack said with a grin. He tossed a few more pieces into the air, which the second drake snapped up with remarkable speed. A hush fell over the crowd, their excitement replaced with stunned confusion. "Why isn't he deceased?" one dignitary hissed in disbelief. In a matter of minutes, Jack had both drakes sitting before him like obedient, oversized canines. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Now," he said, pointing at the larger of the two. "You have the look of a fluffy dot." The drake tilted its head, emitting a low rumble that could be interpreted as a question. The smaller drake grumbled. Jack waved a dismissive hand. "Don't fret, you'll get a name too. Just give me a moment." High above, the arbitrator was undergoing a full-blown crisis. "What in the 7 galaxies is happening?" it shrieked, its appendages thrashing wildly. He should be wailing in agony. "Where are the screams of terror?" Jack glanced upwards and offered a cheerful wave. "Hello up there. Thanks for the dragons. They're delightful." Ignoring the arbitrator's outburst, Jack rummaged in his pocket. "So, you two interested in learning some new skills? Let's start simple, sit." To the utter horror of the Gry, both drakes obediently Saturday. The arbitrator's eyes bulged. This is simply preposterous." "Oh, it's quite real," Jack called back, patting Fluffy's massive head. "Good boy. Now, let's try rolling over." Jack, still bound to the hovercart, was unceremoniously dumped into the pit by a robotic arm. He dusted himself off as he sat up. "Well, this is rustic," he commented to the empty air. A low rumble echoed from the crater's shadows, and 2 gigantic drakes, each the size of a small spaceship, lumbered into view. Their scales shimmered like polished gold, their eyes burned with an intense light, and their talons looked capable of ripping through just about anything. One of the drakes let out a snort, a puff of smoke rising into the air. Jack tilted his head, observing them. "Hey," he said. "They didn't mention the size in the brochure." The assembled Gry roared with excitement. "Destroy him," one screeched. "Turn him into ash," yelled another. Jack calmly stood, stretched, and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small bag of trail mix. "Snack time," he asked the drakes, offering a handful of the nuts and dried fruit. The drakes paused, momentarily confused. Humans typically screamed, cried, or begged for mercy, not offered food. This was a new experience. One of them sniffed cautiously at the offering, then extended an incredibly long tongue, quickly snatching the trail mix. "Knew you'd be hungry," Jack said, grinning. He tossed a few more pieces into the air, and the second drake snapped them up like a feathered lizard catching flies. The crowd fell silent, their bloodlust replaced with stunned bewilderment. "Why isn't he disintegrated?" one dignitary whispered, his elaborate straw drooping from his mouth. Within minutes, Jack had both drakes sitting before him like a pair of oversized, scaly puppies. He tapped a finger against his chin thoughtfully. "Let's see," he said, pointing to the larger drake. "You look like a Fluffy." The drake tilted its massive head, emitting a low rumble that sounded vaguely inquisitive. The smaller drake let out a low growl. Jack waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry, little guy, you'll get a name too. Just give me a sec." High above, the arbitrator was in the midst of a full-blown meltdown. "What in the 7 galaxies is going on down there?" it shrieked, its appendages waving frantically. "He's supposed to be terrified. Where are the screams of anguish?" Jack glanced upwards and offered a cheerful wave. "Hi there. Thanks for the dragons. They're lovely." Ignoring the arbitrator's increasingly frantic cries, Jack dug into his pocket. So, you guys want to learn some tricks? Let's start with something easy, sit. To the complete and utter horror of the Gry, both drakes promptly and obediently Saturday. The arbitrator's eyes bulged. This is impossible. Oh, it's happening all right, Jack called back down, patting Fluffy's massive head. Good boy. Now, let's see if you can roll over. As the sun began to set, the pit of Doom, now resembling a peculiar playground rather than a place of execution, was filled with the contented rumbles of two very large, very happy drakes. Jack, leaning comfortably against Fluffy's flank, idly tossed pieces of trail mix into the air as the drakes played a fiery game of fetch with a charred bone. The Gry dignitaries, their initial bloodthirsty excitement having soured into a horrified disbelief, were in a state of absolute chaos. This is a catastrophe of epic proportions, one wailed, his elaborate drinking straw dangling precariously from his trembling appendage. He's befriended them. The arbitrator, its composure completely shattered, slumped back into its chair, muttering incoherently. I simply cannot comprehend, humans are supposed to be subservient. Jack's voice floated up from the pit, clear and amused. You really should have done your homework. Humans have a knack for connecting with animals. He leaned casually against Fluffy's enormous shoulder, enjoying a granola bar he'd produced from yet another seemingly bottomless pocket. The second drake, now christened Sparky after a minor incident involving a sneeze and a brief but intense burst of flames, rested its head on the ground, watching Jack intently. All right, Fluffy, Jack said, gesturing with his granola bar as if conducting an orchestra. Let's show them your new trick. Play dead. The enormous drake let out a dramatic groan and collapsed onto its side with all the theatrics of a seasoned actor performing a death scene. Dust billowed around Fluffy as it sprawled across the pit, its tail giving a little twitch for added effect. The Gry audience recoiled as one, their confusion palpable. What in the name of the seven galaxies is that human doing? Screeched the supreme arbitrator, teetering on the edge of a tentacle-induced stroke. It appears he's teaching them to act, mumbled an advisor, seriously considering the advantages of feigning his own death to avoid any further involvement in this rapidly unfolding debacle. Sparky, not wanting to be left out, attempted the same maneuver, but misjudged the distance and landed rather clumsily on Fluffy's wing. The larger drake let out a disgruntled grumble, which Jack immediately countered with an exaggerated wag of his finger. Fluffy, play nice. Sparky's still a beginner. By this point, Jack's relaxed attitude had started to spread a wave of panic among the Gry. The arbitrator called for an urgent consultation, which mostly consisted of frantic whispering and a whole lot of unnecessary tentacle waving. Perhaps the drakes are malfunctioning, one dignitary suggested nervously. Malfunctioning? They're 6-story-tall instruments of destruction, the arbitrator snapped. Another official cautiously added, well, they're certainly not acting like it. Shouldn't we consider deploying reinforcements? The arbitrator rounded on him, its voice heavy with sarcasm. Reinforcements? And what, pray tell, do you propose we send into a pit full of dragons who are apparently now best buddies with a human? The group fell silent, occasionally glancing down into the pit where Jack was now attempting to teach Sparky to shake hands, or claws, in this case. Jack, having thoroughly established his dominance over the drakes, was now faced with the challenge of extracting himself and his new companions from the pit of Doom. The Gry dignitaries, still reeling from the shock of witnessing their fearsome executioners transformed into oversized, playful pups, were in no state to offer any resistance. Jack, ever the opportunist, saw this as the perfect moment to negotiate his terms. Right, he announced, his voice echoing up to the stunned audience. Here's the deal. You let us out of here, and you stop treating these magnificent creatures like, well, like props in your twisted gladiator games. The arbitrator, its composure still in tatters, spluttered in indignation. But you're a prisoner. You can't just dictate terms to us. Jack simply shrugged, patting Fluffy's massive head. I'm not dictating, I'm negotiating. And trust me, you don't want to see what Fluffy can do when he's not getting his way. Fluffy, as if on cue, let out a low growl that reverberated through the crater, sending a wave of fear through the already terrified Gry. The Gry, realizing the precariousness of their situation, reluctantly agreed to Jack's terms. A robotic arm, the same one that had unceremoniously dropped Jack into the pit, now extended downwards, carrying a platform large enough to accommodate both Drakes and their newfound human companion. As the platform ascended, carrying Jack, Fluffy, and Sparky, the arbitrator couldn't help but mutter, "This is a complete and utter disaster. Our reputation is in shambles." One of the dignitaries, having accepted the absurdity of the situation, offered a hesitant suggestion. Perhaps we should offer him a position? He clearly has a talent for interspecies relations. The arbitrator stared at the dignitary as if they had sprouted a second head. Offer him a position? After he humiliated us in front of the entire galaxy? Are you insane? Meanwhile, as the platform reached the top of the crater, Jack surveyed the scene with a grin. "So," he said, addressing the assembled Gry, "what's next on the agenda? Lunch? A tour of your facilities? I'm open to suggestions." The arbitrator could only sputter incoherently, its tentacles flailing wildly. Jack, now on solid ground and surrounded by a group of thoroughly bewildered Gry, decided to press his advantage. "Now, about these dragons," he began, gesturing towards Fluffy and Sparky, who were now sniffing curiously at the elaborate straws still clutched in the dignitary's trembling appendages. "They're not exactly fans of the whole pit of doom thing. Perhaps we could find them some more suitable accommodations?" The arbitrator, its voice still shaky, managed to stammer, "Accommodations? But they're beasts of war. Instruments of destruction." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because they seem more interested in snacks and belly rubs than destruction right now." He pulled out another handful of trail mix, which both Drakes promptly devoured, their rumbling purrs further undermining the arbitrator's argument. Another dignitary, perhaps sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, chimed in, "Perhaps it's a spacious enclosure? With ample foliage and recreational activities?" Jack considered this for a moment. Recreational activities. I like the way you think. We'll need a large ball, some chew toys, maybe a fire hydrant or two." The arbitrator nearly choked. "A fire hydrant? For dragons?" Jack, ever the pragmatist, began to outline his demands. "Right, so, comfortable accommodations for Fluffy and Sparky, a lifetime supply of trail mix, and oh, yes, I'll need a ship. A fast one. Preferably with comfortable seating and decent in-flight entertainment." The arbitrator, barely able to contain its outrage, sputtered, "A ship? You expect us to just give you a ship?" "After you," Jack cut him off with a wave of his hand. "After I saved you the embarrassment of having your most fearsome weapons turned into oversized, fire-breathing lapdogs. Yes, I believe a ship is a reasonable request." He turned to Fluffy and Sparky, who were now engaged in a playful tussle over a discarded straw. "Don't you agree, boys?" The dragons, interpreting this as a cue for approval, rumbled and snorted in agreement, their combined breath creating a small gust of wind that nearly extinguished the arbitrator's flickering flame of authority. The Gry, now thoroughly cowed, had no choice but to acquiesce to Jack's demands. A state-of-the-art Gry vessel was prepared, stocked with a veritable mountain of trail mix and other assorted snacks. As Jack, Fluffy, and Sparky boarded the ship, the arbitrator made one last attempt to salvage some semblance of dignity. "This isn't over, human," it hissed, its tentacles twitching nervously. "We will find a way to reclaim our honor." Jack simply grinned, settling into the pilot's seat. "If you say so," he replied, as the ship's engines hummed to life. "But in the meantime, we're going to explore the galaxy. Maybe find a planet with some decent pizza. You know, relax." With a final wave, Jack piloted the ship out of the Gry compound, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos and bewilderment. The pit of Weren Doom, once a symbol of Gry power and intimidation, was now just a large crater filled with discarded snack wrappers and the faint scent of dragon breath. The supreme arbitrator, its tentacles drooping in defeat, could only watch as the ship disappeared into the vastness of space, carrying the human and his two unlikely companions to new adventures. Jack, back on solid ground with two very content drakes, surveyed the scene of utter Gry confusion and decided to press his advantage. So, he began, gesturing towards Fluffy and Sparky, who were now investigating the elaborate straws still clutched in the trembling appendages of the dignitaries, about these dragons. They're not exactly thrilled with the whole Pit of Doom setup. Maybe we could find them something a bit more suitable. The arbitrator, its voice still quivering, stammered, suitable. But they're instruments of war. Engines of destruction. Jack raised a skeptical eyebrow. Really? Because right now they seem more interested in snacks and a good scratch behind the ears than world domination. He produced another handful of trail mix, which both drakes promptly devoured with rumbling purrs, effectively negating the arbitrator's point. Another dignitary, sensing a chance to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation, chimed in. Perhaps it's a more spacious habitat? With ample vegetation and recreational opportunities? Jack pondered this. Recreational opportunities, eh? I like the sound of that. We'll need a large ball, some durable chew toys, maybe a fire hydrant or two. The arbitrator choked. A fire hydrant? For dragons? Jack, comfortably settled in the pilot's seat of the purloined Gry vessel, steered the ship with the easy confidence of a man who'd just orchestrated a daring escape from a high-security alien compound with two dragons as his accomplices. Fluffy and Sparky, too large for the confines of the ship, effortlessly kept pace alongside, their powerful wings slicing through the thin upper atmosphere of the planet. Okay, Fluffy, Jack said, consulting the ship's navigation system, looks like there's a deserted moon nearby. I say we set down there, regroup, and figure out our next move. Fluffy emitted a deep rumble, which Jack, now fluent in basic Drake, interpreted as a hearty affirmation. Sparky, ever the enthusiastic one, responded with a celebratory burst of flame, nearly scorching Fluffy's tail in the process. Easy on the pyrotechnics, Sparky, Jack chuckled. Save it for the victory celebration. The moon proved to be a barren yet strangely beautiful landscape, its surface a shimmering expanse of silver sand that glittered under the pale light of a distant sun. Jack landed the ship on a level plateau, while Fluffy and Sparky circled overhead before gracefully alighting beside the vessel, their massive weight stirring up miniature sandstorms. Home sweet moon, Jack declared, stepping out of the cockpit and stretching his legs. Could use a bit of landscaping, maybe a jacuzzi, but it'll do for now. The dragons settled nearby, their movement surprisingly elegant for creatures of their colossal size. Fluffy stretched out like an enormous feline, while Sparky began enthusiastically excavating a hole in the sand, sending showers of sparkling particles into the air. All right, Jack announced, taking a seat on a conveniently located smooth rock, strategy session. You two are officially free agents. No more cages, no more pits, no more Gry goons ordering you around. The dragons regarded him intently, their eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Jack continued, but freedom comes with responsibilities. We can't just go around smashing stuff and setting things on fire, well, not unless they really, really deserve it. Fluffy rumbled in agreement, while Sparky, though clearly less enthused about the limitations on wanton destruction, nodded his assent. Good, Jack said, leaning back against the rock. Because I have a hunch the Gry aren't going to let this slide. And if they come looking for payback, we need a plan. As if on cue, a faint hum vibrated through the moon's tranquil silence. Jack sat up, squinting at the horizon. A sleek Gry vessel was descending, its silhouette stark against the star-dusted backdrop. Well, Jack muttered, that was quicker than expected.